Are you tired of your old bifold or trifold wallet that ends up falling apart after a while and eventually turns into an amorphous shape that resembles nothing of the rectangle it was when you bought it? Then maybe it's time to upgrade to something more durable and sleek that won't be extremely uncomfortable in your front or back pocket. The Ridge offers their flagship wallet in over a dozen different styles and comes in your choice of carbon, forged carbon, titanium, or aluminum, along with other high-quality products from everyday essentials to on-the-go needs. The wallet in particular being a great gift idea just in time for Christmas. If you'd like to check out the Ridge's products, which come with a lifetime warranty, you can go to ridge.com/gilly and use the code GILLY to get 10% off your order with free worldwide shipping. Link in the description. A while back, I made a video covering a bunch of really bad Disney games. That video went over pretty well, and so it was only a matter of time before I took another crack at it. Now this is well known, and I think most people are in agreement that some of the best classic games of all time happen to also be Disney licensed games. They're talked about pretty often. What doesn't get talked about nearly as much though is the seemingly endless sea of really bad Disney licensed games, so I decided to dive back into the cesspool and check out a few more. Today, let's check out some really terrible Disney licensed games. And these ones are pretty obscure because I honestly don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about them before. Real quick, if you liked the video, consider subscribing. A pretty substantial amount of views across the entire channel come from non-subscribers, and subscribing really does help more than most people realize. And it's also the best way to make sure you don't miss it when I upload new videos if you like what you see. So if you want to see more, consider tapping that button. With that out of the way, onto the video. In 1993, Sunsoft developed two Beauty and the Beast games for the Sega Genesis which run on the same engine, look and control the same, but are for the most part two totally different genres, and both are terrible in their own special way. The two games released were called Beauty and the Beast Roar of the Beast and Belle's Quest. I might as well touch on Roar of the Beast first since it's easily the more broken of the two, and I could barely make it past the first stage. Roar of the Beast is one of those walk down a hallway while avoiding or attacking enemies games, or at least that's what I can tell of the 1 1/8 stages that I played. It's slow and clunky, and enemies basically endlessly come at you while you try to make it to the end of the stage. This is easier said than done though, because the game isn't very responsive, and a lot of times, enemies appear on screen so fast that you don't really have enough time to react. Beast also has a limited resource roar ability which freezes enemies in place, but unfortunately, their hitboxes remain active, and coupled with just how jacked up the hitboxes in this game are, a lot of the times you'll use the roar ability to save yourself and then wind up getting hurt anyway once you try to attack the frozen enemies. I was determined to at least make it past the first stage, and eventually after trying over and over, I did it, only to immediately get a game over on the next stage, and despite having a continue option, continuing the game just spawned me back at the beginning of the first stage. Not that it matters anyway, because the game only gives you one extra continue. It was at this point that I gave up and I booted up Belle's Quest, a game whose cutscenes clearly weren't written by an English major. Now, Belle's Quest has a different approach, and it's definitely the more serviceable game of the two, but it's honestly equally as terrible. Instead of a straight-up action game like Roar of the Beast, Belle's Quest is sort of an adventure game, if you can call it that. The game consists of walking around finding items, talking to people for hints or help, and traversing mazes to progress, all while throwing in the same kinds of enemies from the other game, only this time being unable to attack them and needing to constantly dodge them, which isn't too much of a problem during the first two stages, but becomes a nightmare by the third. The third stage of this game is the most frustrating thing in the universe. It's a big maze filled with locked doors. The whole entire stage looks exactly the same with no distinctive landmarks between rooms and corridors, and no map to make it even slightly bearable. This wouldn't be half as bad if it wasn't for the fact that you constantly have enemies coming after you, so it's really hard to concentrate on where you are and where you've been when you have an endless onslaught of enemies attacking you with no means of defense. Eventually, after looking up a text guide and tediously following it, I was able to fumble my way through the stage and finished it by the skin of my teeth with one life left. Unfortunately for me, the next stage is nothing like the rest of the game, and it's a fast-paced action stage where you need to avoid hazards while on horseback. Nothing about the controls of this stage are explained, so I died pretty much immediately, and for whatever reason, I didn't have a continue option despite the fact that I'm almost positive I didn't use a continue. So unless I used one and didn't remember, it looks like Belle's Quest doesn't have the continue system that Roar of the Beast does. Really thought I was going to be able to beat this one since I made it to the last stage. The game is extremely short, but given the fact that they throw that shit at you at the end, I wasn't about to restart all the way from the beginning. Tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme, wallow in defeat. The Lion King Simba's Mighty Adventure came out at the very end of the year 2000, and its existence is kind of confusing to me. According to the game itself and the box art,
The game is just called The Lion King: Simba's Mighty Adventure and depicts the scene of Simba fighting Scar at the end of the first movie. Despite this, though, apparently the game's data refers to it as The Lion King 2, and it turns out only half the game covers the first Lion King movie. The second half of the game sees you going through the second movie's plot, but I'll be honest, I didn't play long enough to find that out. Though to be fair, after getting through half the stages and realizing I was already up to Scar, I had a hunch that there was more to it. So this game is a platformer, and it heavily borrows from games like Crash, only done much less gracefully. The controls are really bad and unresponsive, and you don't have a full range of motion for whatever reason. I'd like to think that it's because the game doesn't have analog support, but Spyro managed to pull it off just fine when using only the D-pad. I always have a hard time explaining it when games do this, but you can't just go the direction you want to go. And you can't just turn on a dime. Every movement requires you to move just a little bit in the direction you were already moving, and you also can't jump forward once fully stopped and need to build up momentum first. This makes platforming on small obstacles with bottomless pits extremely cumbersome and frustrating, and it doesn't help when enemies are constantly trying to attack you, and your best attack also causes you to move forward. It also doesn't help that anytime you so much as touch like a pixel against any kind of wall or object, Simba bumps into it and then stops and makes a grunting noise like he's Tommy Pickles from the Rugrats game. Much like Crash, the game is segmented into two stage types. There's the 3D space sections and the 2D sections. I'll be honest, this is basically just if Crash Bandicoot sucked and was lions. For the most part, the object is to collect a certain number of tokens and make it to the end of the stage, but every so often a stage will end with a boss. In the case of my final moments with the game, the stage leading up to the fight with Scar is extremely janky and puts you in situations where sometimes you die and it's straight up not your fault because the game threw some shit at you that the controls make it incapable of reacting to. I game overed on Scar's stage multiple times, but eventually I finally made it to the end. And then the Scar fight was complete and utter cheap garbage. Simba is so slow that once you attack Scar, the window of time you have to retreat is too small to actually avoid getting hit. There's probably a strategy that can be used here, but once Scar killed me and I got another game over, I then would have to replay the entire stage again just to get another opportunity to maybe figure out how to beat him, and this game is not worth that kind of time. As many of you probably already know, at some point in time, the Big D turned Disney princesses into its own IP. It's basically Disney's excuse to throw a bunch of the Disney princesses together into one single piece of media to maximize sellability. Well, in 2007, Disney Interactive Studios published a game for the Nintendo DS called Disney Princesses Magical Jewels, and it's one of those do the same exact thing over and over types of games. Basically, the bulk of this game consists of controlling Cinderella, Belle, Snow White, and Aurora in each princess's respective world, collecting jewel shards to rebuild a castle. I won't elaborate further on the story because who gives a f***? Now, the only outlier when it comes to the gameplay happens when you enter these minigames where you have to beat a boss by, once again, collecting jewel shards. But aside from that, the mass majority of this game is doing the same thing over and over. This game is like the textbook definition of tedium, and as a kid's game, I kinda get it, but what they didn't need to do was the whole, it's on the DS, so touch controls thing. Literally none of the buttons on the DS are used for gameplay, period. Everything in this game is controlled with the stylus, and it makes this game go from boring to unpleasant. You need to use the stylus to do basically two things. One is to control this little character named Sprite, who is sometimes used to create paths to different parts of the stage, but 98% of the time is just used to make jewel shards fall to the ground so each respective princess can pick them up. The stylus is also used to control the princesses and make them move left to right. Now, you can traverse the stage going in and out of doors and up and down to collect all the shards, but the truth is, most of the time, you could just make a beeline to the end of the stage and still collect more than enough shards needed to progress, making more of the content in this game pointless. After each world, you get a jewel that helps you rebuild parts of the castle, but this is just the same exact thing over and over and over again with a different coat of paint depending on the princess you choose, and there's like a billion stages. The only other gameplay change is in these two optional minigames that don't seem to serve a purpose. One, which is this Little Mermaid themed one where the goal is to stack bubbles, and the other where you control Jasmine flying around the Cave of Wonders collecting lamps. Like, I genuinely don't know why they're there. When you beat the games, they don't even do anything. You don't get anything for beating them, and I think it's just an excuse for them to stick Ariel and Jasmine in the game. Plenty of kids' games are like this, not that it's an excuse, but a lot of them are super easy and tedious, but in terms of the controls, there's absolutely no reason why they couldn't have been also mapped to the D-pad. That would have at least made the game bearable. I would really be surprised if any kid actually got any enjoyment enjoyment out of this garbage. Also, I don't know if you've been able to tell, but the game is so shockingly poorly optimized and has constant hiccups and slowdowns when literally anything happens on screen. This is a slow-paced, side-scrolling 2D game on the DS. The fact that they were able to make a game that runs this badly is quite frankly impressive. Goofy's Funhouse's title is a little bit misleading because this shit ain't fun. Look, I've had to use multiple bleeps in this video, look at that. Developed for the PS1 by a company I've never heard of called New Kid Co., Goofy's Funhouse is a sort of collectathon adventure game, but it's really not much of an adventure because you're basically only exploring a house. Second time I'm referencing this game, but this reminds me a lot of that Rugrats game for the PS1, only about 100 times worse. The goal is to walk around the house collecting film reels to unlock Goofy cartoons. Once you unlock them, you can actually watch them. Now, that reward is actually kind of cool, but it's pretty much this game's only redeeming quality. You also have to go around collecting different items, which pretty much just requires you to be thorough and interact with everything. Now, in the main room you start in, there's these photos on the wall which each house a minigame, and all except for one of them for some reason can't actually be accessed until you find whatever other items correlate to the photo you've currently selected. Once all the items have been found, you can play one of 5 different minigames. There's golf, fishing, skiing, this dog obstacle course thing, and a driving minigame. The fishing one is easily the most time-consuming and the most frustrating, but I think I have to give the honor of worst minigame to the car one. Now, the whole game overall runs at an extremely low frame rate, which isn't helped by the fact that Goofy himself controls like he's covered in syrup, but the racing minigame's frame rate is so low that I, no exaggeration, can count the amount of frames with my eyes, and I'm sure plenty of you can too. The worst part about this whole hunk of crap though is the fact that I actually pushed myself to complete all the minigames just to see what I'd get, and I got nothing. I spent 45 minutes fishing and wanting to rip every hair out of my head one by one, and it was all for nothing. I didn't even get a credit scene. Oh, and your only reward, by the way, the old cartoons? Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's no fast forward or rewind function, so have fun with that. Also, the load times are atrocious, and the whole thing is just so slow that getting from point A to point B anywhere in the game is a chore. I've played a lot of awful games in my day, but this one immediately gets a spot next to some of the greats. And that's all the garbage I checked out for this one. Before starting this video, I never actually touched any of these games, and the only ones I had even heard of before were the Beauty and the Beast ones for the Genesis. Surprised I never hear anyone talk about any of these, but I guess with the sheer volume of Disney games out there, a lot of it flies under people's radar. I'm going to tell you right now that none of these games have any redeeming qualities that make any of them worth checking out, even for a laugh. And if I'm being fair, the only one who would have a chance at being worth glancing at would have been the Goofy game, and that one is so bogged down by performance issues and is just so sluggish to play that I can't even recommend it as a joke. Well, until next time, friends, and I'm pretty sure there will be a next time because this sea is vast. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it and want to see more, there's a couple other videos right there you can check out. And if you want to see everything I upload, subscribe and then tap the bell icon. And if you want to help support the channel, I also have a Patreon right there too.